G'day, ZiggyD here, and there's less than 15 hours until Path of Exile's open beta launch, and Grinding Gear have given us a few blog posts and the 0.10.0 patch notes, the open beta official patch notes finally. So we now know exactly what is going into the open beta and what has changed since the alpha stream that Kripparrian did. Now there's some pretty exciting stuff here, and these are pretty extensive patch notes. There's a lot of interesting stuff in here, and a lot of just small stuff like graphical improvements, bug fixes, and slight balance changes, which aren't too game-changing, but there are a few major changes in here. And in this video, I want to talk about these really big changes that are going into open beta that are essentially going to change the way the game plays for a lot of people. Now, I think Kripparrian said it best when he said, getting patch notes is like getting Christmas presents. It's very exciting to see what happens. So let's go through some of the more exciting ones here. So first up, we have the addition of Act 3 and the removal of a difficulty. Act 3 adds a lot of new content to the game, and developers felt that the 4 difficulties was tiresome for most players. They found that a lot of people would just really quickly skip through one of the difficulties at least, and that while 3 felt good for most people, 4 was really pushing it. So this is a big restructure of the game in terms of the leveling progression. So a lot of zones have had their levels changed, and the difficulty curve is a bit smoother overall, but it ramps up towards the ends of each act and then the ends of each difficulty. So it's sort of got those little peaks there where there'll be harder points in the games. The final change in terms of world balancing is that in Merciless, side quests are much higher level than the content that they're near to, the normal story arc missions that are around them. So this means that most players will progress along the main story quest line, and then they'll go back to the side quests when they can handle the content a bit easier. In simpler terms, it means that you'll probably come back to fight Hailrake after you've finished Act 1. So that adds an interesting new twist to the game, and it actually falls in line with the way a lot of people were playing, where they would do some further quests and then go back and do side quests as they needed to, as they wanted the rewards, or as the side quest was a bit more manageable, especially if they were playing in hardcore. So that's an interesting change. And now let's take a look at some of the major skill and build balance changes that are happening in open beta. As reported earlier, Lightning Arrow is now much weaker. It's basically been redesigned from the ground up as a more spammable but less powerful ability. Next, totems have been reduced in power through both life and cast speed reductions, especially spell totems. The dual totem passive is also now a keystone, with the drawback of preventing your character from directly dealing damage themselves. It still allows you to indirectly deal damage through things like minions, traps, and mines. So this means that we should see some interesting builds centered around the dual totem passives, like 100% summoner builds that don't actually use any attacks themselves. So that's pretty interesting stuff. Next up, auras have been made more expensive overall, and some have also been made a bit weaker. Running a lot of auras on your build now is going to be much more difficult, so you have to select the ones that are really essential for your build. Next, the phase run ability has been completely removed to be redesigned, and in the meantime, Quicksilver Flasks now take their place as a temporary move speed bonus, so obviously at the cost of a flask space. On a similar note, Diamond Flasks have also been removed, with no word yet as to whether they'll be coming back. So next up, we're having some major changes to Chaos Damage and the Keystone passive Chaos Inoculation. Firstly, Chaos Inoculation now gives Chaos immunity. It did in closed beta, but for temporarily in alpha beta it wasn't giving immunity. It was just like applying it to Energy Shield instead. But Chaos Inoculation has the immunity again, but it now has no Energy Shield buff whatsoever. And this includes any passive nodes that were tied to it temporarily in the alpha. They no longer exist. So it's pretty much that the Chaos Inoculation passive now basically has nothing to do with Energy Shield, other than that your character's probably going to need a fair amount of Energy Shield to survive after taking Chaos Inoculation. So that's an interesting change. Now, in more general terms, Chaos Damage is now affected by Chaos Resistances, which can be found on gear and through some passives. Now, this doesn't include all resistances, so anything that says all elemental resistances only applies to the other elements and not Chaos, so Chaos will be a separate resistance which will be important to stack. Resistance penalties also now apply in Cruel and Merciless difficulties, and it's something like 60% in Merciless, so it's quite a big penalty. So Chaos damage resistance is going to be an important thing to be mindful of as you get towards the later game. However, to balance this out a bit, sources of Chaos damage have been reduced slightly, so the amount of things that put it out. And there's also been an overall reduction in the severity of that Chaos damage, so that should balance things out a little bit. But with that reduction in resistances, it's definitely something you have to be aware of. So another interesting change is that there's been some changes made to the in-game economy and how the currency orbs and things like that are given out. Basically, there are now a lot more currency orbs available through trading to vendors. Pretty much everything up to alchemy orbs is now purchasable. So even though the vendor exchange rate is quite a bit higher or less favourable for the player than it has been in the past in player-to-player exchanges, we should still see a change to the exchange rates overall for these orbs that are now available at the vendors, because although the vendors are more expensive, they're also much faster and more convenient, so we'll still see a fair few people using those when they don't want to have to deal with player versus player-to-player trading. Now, an interesting change, but not necessarily a large one, is that unique items have been rebalanced, mostly upwards in power, so they've been buffed overall. Also, low-level uniques have had their defensive modifiers changed to flat integer increases rather than arbitrarily high percentage increases, so that makes things a little bit simpler to look at. So, and then finally we have microtransactions and the microtransaction system being added into the game in full. So the microtransaction system will be in full swing when open beta releases, but we can't see any of the specific things that will be in the shop until that time. So I'll probably make a video covering the options available to you in more detail, but so far it looks like we're getting a number of new pets which have been shown in a few little teaser videos on the Grinding Gear Games YouTube. I'll try and throw a link to that in the description below. We're also getting gear skins, gear particle effects which can be applied, and spell effect skins, so this should be pretty interesting to see. I'm looking forward to seeing some really flashy and shiny players wandering around the world of Raidcast. So that's it for this video. If you guys want to read through some of the more specific changes in more detail, I'll put some links to the actual blogs and patch notes in the description below. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.